for the Lord is for you have been tremendous. And Pepsi, and he gets pizza. That's what it was. Boy, just Sunday, from the very start, Sunday morning, the Sunday school lesson was just tremendous. And then the messages on Sunday morning, Sunday night were great. Last night was wonderful as well. And saw a good response last night at the altar. And I'm thankful for that. Well, anyway, we're here. All the offerings that we receive will go as a love offering. We try to make sure that Cindy gets some of that too, but Mrs. Stringer, and they are such a wonderful team and work so well together. But we love Brother Stringer, and he's a great man of God. I really mean that. And he's always been a faithful friend to me, and for that I'm very grateful. So we get to invest in him. We can invest in prayer. We can invest financially. And so if you have the opportunity here tonight to give, I hope that you will do that. So men, if you would come, we'll receive that. And we're going to do two things at once. We got two preacher friends here tonight as well. In addition to Brother Stringer. Brother Stringer has to preach, and so we'll let him do that. I got a preacher friend, Alex, that he's always here. You understand? And so I'm going to have one of them open and the other one closed tonight. So you guys flip a coin, do what you want to do. But I'll tell you what, you got tenure, Brother Hillenberg. Why don't you stand up? Ask the blessing on the offering and on the preaching tonight, and that God would speak to our hearts.
Heavenly Father, we love you so much. Thank you for such a privilege to be able to.
Amen. Thank you.
All the way my Savior leads me, what have I to ask beside? Can I doubt his tender faith in him to dwell. For I know whate'er befall me, Jesus doeth all things well. For I know whate'er befall me, Jesus doeth all things well. All the way my Savior leads me, oh, the fullness of his love. Perfect rest to me is promised in my Father's house above. When my spirit clothed immortal winged its flight to realms of day, this my song through endless ages, Jesus led me all the way. This my song through endless ages, Jesus led me all the way.
Works construction, so he has to make definite plans to be off in the evening. You got to make hay while the sun shines, and that's what builders do, that's for sure. But appreciate him and his love for the Lord and his ministry here for us. Well, I hope that you have been as blessed as I have, and we're just going to let him come right out of the chute and preach to us tonight. God bless you, preacher. And as we have said, we love you dearly and thank God for you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, folks. I'm sure glad you folks are here. I'm privileged to have the opportunity to be here with you in this church. I'm going to ask you to go to Lamentations chapter 3 with me tonight. And there is, in Lamentations chapter 3 and verse 21, a verse that jumped out at me one day. I was down in Florida. It was a Wednesday, and I'm getting ready to go preach at a church that night. I'm taking the college ladies, I'm at a Bible college there, and I'm taking the college ladies trio and a pianist with me. I'm going to run the van down to the college, pick them up. They're going to sing. A few minutes before it's time to leave, I'm just reading my Bible, and this verse jumps out at me. Verse 21. This I recall to mind, therefore have I hope. Man, that's pretty impressive. I don't know about you, but I could use something that every time I think about it, it causes me to have hope. But I didn't have time to do anything with it. It's time to go, and so I take off, get the young ladies, head to the church, and we get to the church. And the pastor had asked them to take an hour to sing and give testimonies. So we get there, they're singing. While they're singing, I know enough about the Bible to know the basic rule of context. The explanation for every passage of Scripture is in either what comes right before or what comes right after. I said, I'd like to understand what it is that gives you hope every time you think about it. So while girls are singing, I said, I'm going to start reading this and see if I can figure out when this is. And when I got it, I threw away the message I had planned for that night. Preached Lamentations chapter 3. It filled me with hope, and I've been preaching it ever since. That was more than 20 years ago, but I preach it several times a year ever since. Because whenever I do, it fills me with hope. I hope it's great if somebody else gets in on that too. But it always takes care of me, so I know one person in the service was blessed anyway. So, the explanation for what gives us hope either has to come in the verses before or after. So, let's start in verse 1 and see if we can be encouraged. Okay? We're in Lamentations chapter 3. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. I got to tell you, that doesn't fill me much with hope. I understand it. Sometimes God chastens us. Sometimes he deals with us. I understand the truth of it. I understand the why of it. But it'd be all right with me if it never ever happened to me again. That doesn't fill me with hope. Let's see if verse 2 does me any better. He hath led me and brought me into darkness, but not into light. Sometimes the Lord takes me step by step, and I cannot see where He's taken me, and I can't understand what's happening, and I don't know where I'm going. I've been there. I understand it. I've counseled people about being there. Talked to a pastor who called me today. I get it. But I can't tell you that fills me with hope. I've been there, but if it's up to me, I'd never be there again. So I'm not encouraged yet. Let's try verse 3. See if it fills us with hope. Surely against me is he turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. Now there's a blessing for you. Sometimes the Lord works against us. We make plans. We have in mind what we're going to do, and God is not in it, and He doesn't let us. I know that, but I can't tell you that fills me with hope. It really doesn't. How about verse 4? My flesh and my skin hath He made old. He hath broken my bones. How's that for a blessing? All that happens is that I get older. And then next year, I get older. And next year, I get older. I first started going to the Philippines to preach and teach in Bible college there 27 years ago. And the college I teach in is on the 5th floor of a building. So I first started going there, and they would, no elevators or anything. You're going to walk up. And they would always have a couple students there. And the students would offer to take my briefcase and help me up the stairs. And man, it used to irritate me, Brother Hillenberg, that they thought I needed their help. And at the time, I'm down at Landmark Baptist College in Florida. We had a 10-story building. And so I would get ready for going to the Philippines. For 30 days before I went, I would walk those 10 stories every day. So by the time I got to the Philippines, and these young whippersnappers would come up to offer me up the stairs, and they'd want to take my briefcase, I'd grab their briefcase and run up the stairs. 27 years later. You want to know what I do now? I say, thank you, man. I've gotten over being offended by it. I don't spend any time trying to get ready to run it. I'm just glad when I finally get up there. All I do is get older. I know that. It's part of the territory. I've watched everybody else. I know how these things go. That situation, I was talking with a gentleman this afternoon. I didn't realize it, but he was at my ordination. He was in the audience at my ordination 48 years ago. I said, man, were we different then? I understand we're getting older. It goes with the territory. But I can't tell you that fills me with hope. I don't enjoy it. There's nothing, I'm going to be older next year. I never say, isn't this great? I'm going to be older next year. So I'm not encouraged yet. How about verse 5? He hath builded against me and compassed me with gall and travail. Sometimes God actually puts obstacles in my way to keep me from doing what I want to do. I work so hard and I put effort in it and I pray and I beg, and God says no, and puts one problem after another problem after another problem and another problem in front of me. I understand that. It's how He builds us. It's how He prepares us. It's how He gets us ready for future things. But I can't tell you, it encourages me. I can't tell you I ever want to have a moment like that again. I can't tell you I ever want to have that kind of experience again where this is the plan, but God is always in the way. don't know about you folks, I've been reading 5 verses and I'm not encouraged yet. Let's try verse 6. He hath set me in dark places as they that be dead of old. How's that for a blessing? How many of you have that as your life verse? Just so you think about it every day. The scene played out in a lot of the old horror movies we used to watch when I was a kid. Somebody in some circumstance or another gets buried alive, and they're unconscious when they're buried, and they wake up in the coffin, and they realize they're in a coffin, and there's nothing they can do. There's no way to get out of it. They don't have any hope, and they're just trapped there in the coffin, and the bad guy, the villain, put them there so they'd wake up, and they'd have that horrifying experience, and they would see how helpless they were, and there was nothing they could do. Boy, that's a blessed thought. Jeremiah said, sometimes I feel like that. I'm the fellow buried alive. By the way, Jeremiah wasn't just whining over some little minor problem or the other. This is written during the time that Babylon is taking Jerusalem. And it was the policy of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's army, he led, first as a general, then later as the emperor, besieged 34 cities his lifetime. He conquered every one of them, every time. And he had a policy when he showed up. He'd announce he was there. He was Nebuchadnezzar, the great conqueror. Eventually they gave him the title of the conqueror of cities. The conqueror of cities was there. If you surrender, you'll be treated leniently. And a number of cities did. If I have to conquer you, when we have broken through, my army will be turned loose for 72 hours. And my soldiers will be able to murder, kill, rape, pillage, anything they want for 72 hours. The Bible tells us when that moment came, that Jeremiah, he put a guard on Jeremiah so they could not kill Jeremiah. But Jeremiah is in his apartment. He's listening to the horror taking place outside for 72 hours. And Jewish tradition says the book of Lamentations was written during that time, that 72 hours that he was in that apartment, listening to the slaughter of his people out in the streets. So he wasn't just complaining about some little old thing. And there he was. And you know what he could do about it? Not a thing. Like the person buried in a coffin. He could hear the cries, the weeping, the mourning, the horror. And he did not have the power to lift a finger to save one single person out of that agony. He was helpless. Verse 7, he hath hedged me about, that I could not get out. He hath made my chain heavy. He was looking at something. There was absolutely nothing he could do about. I know many of us fear for what's happening in our country. And we look at it, we see paganism taking over. I've been preaching that for 20 years, that the United States was going pagan. Wrote a book about it 30 years ago. I have back on the table, it's been updated, but it was written 30 years ago with chapters on the new paganism and how America was going pagan. Just read today an article in a secular publication about how America has gone pagan. You don't have to listen very long or look very long till you can figure it out. It's the day of the TikTok influencer, people going on TikTok just to give their opinion and to attract people to what they're saying. And I saw 2 days ago, I hated to because of the language, but I posted it on my Facebook yesterday, and a young woman talking about how they go behind abortion clinics to steal the carcasses of the babies out of the trash and eat them. And she dared God to punish her over it. I'm telling you, paganism is not just a long distant memory. Paganism is here. And they've found this kind of thing in a number of places, but I've been to one of them in Syria where there was a pagan temple from the years past, and they would sacrifice the little children there. And the particular pagan temple that I was at, when it was uncovered, they found the skeletons of 20,000 babies that had been sacrificed in that pagan temple. And by the way, we're exactly there. We're just so technologically sophisticated, we can sacrifice them before they ever leave the mother's womb. And the judgment of God comes on such nations. And Jeremiah is watching it. And he's saying, there's nothing I can do. And I understand that. I hope I don't get to understand it better. But I might. Well, I don't know about you. I understand it, but that doesn't exactly fill me with encouragement. I'm reading verse 7, and I'm not encouraged yet. How about verse 8? Also when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. You ever had moments and you begged and you pleaded and you cried out to God for something, and it's like he didn't listen? I mean, I have lots of stories of miraculous and immediate answer to prayer and incredible things. When I was pastor in Chicago, every now and then I'd go out for a walk to stretch a bit. One day I hadn't planned to do that. I was really too busy to do it, but I just felt like you got to go for a walk. You got to go for a walk. I got up, began to walk, and I couldn't explain it. I said, need to go that direction, need to go down that way. I walked down that way a few blocks, and one of the young ladies from our deaf department was sitting on a street corner in tears, crying. And I went up to her, and she immediately pulled out pen and paper, and she said, oh, Pastor, thank God you're here. She said, I was praying for somebody to help me. She said, I'm supposed to go to so-and-so, and I am completely lost. I do not know where to go or what to do. So I sat right down here and prayed that God would help me, and I looked up, and you're standing there. And she told me where she was going. It was about 6 blocks away. I walked her there. And I told her later, I said, I want you to start praying for me. You get your prayers answered right away. I said, sometimes my answers don't come that quick. There are things I've wept and cried and prayed to God over and never saw God answer. As a younger Christian, that was a hard thing to come to grips with. Sometimes God's priorities aren't mine. I've told folks, it appears that God or one has a scheduling problem. I want things done at a certain time, and he doesn't. One of us is not scheduling wisely, Brother Abbott. Might turn it out it's me. I've watched people die that I didn't want to die. I mean, I should not be shocked. Everybody dies sooner or later. I've watched ministries die that I did not want to see die because I knew God had once greatly used those ministries. And it took a long time for me to figure out ministries die too, just like people do. And sometimes folks will go to great lengths to try and prop them up, when the truth is, they're already dead. I do not like that. I understand it, but I can't tell you that fills me with hope. I'd just soon never watch that again. Had a handful of older men that were uniquely a blessing to me, that I could call when I had a moment I couldn't figure out what I was doing. And I mean, I just treasured being able to pick up the phone and call them at any time and know I had the wisdom of their experience and their advice and their counsel, and they cared what happened to me. Not one of them is still here. That's what happens when you get older. The people you're looking to that are older, and there you go. I understand it, but I can't tell you that fills me with hope. that I'll never ask those men for counsel again. He hath enclosed my ways with hewn stone. He hath made my paths crooked. I'm trying to walk from here to there, and he puts up a brick wall in the middle and twists and turns the path all around. I know that. Sometimes God is putting us through teaching moments when he's taking us from one experience to another, and the purpose is to mold us and make us and teach us. Know that? Been there? Don't like it. Just soon not do it again. That didn't fill me with hope. He was into me as a bear lying in wait and as a lion in secret places. Man, the image is of an animal that could rip you to pieces. I'm not a hunter. I've not been around this much. I've certainly not been around lions. I used to take my vacation every year at this camp in the North Carolina mountains right next to the bear preserve. And they'd have signs that told you where the retreat ended and the bear preserve started. But turned out the bears didn't always honor those signs. And so they'd tell us, never go out by yourself. Always go out in a group. You make some noise, bears will hail you, they'll stay away, you're just fine. I was there one week, when actually my vacation that week, but there's a Christian retreat I was a speaker at. I'm wrestling with a difficult, life-changing decision. I'm needing some time by myself. So I just take a hike out in the woods, early morning before everybody else is up. Just wanted to be alone with God and in nature and all that. And I'm walking along alone, and I go around a little curve in the trail, and there's a bear standing right there. He looked at me. I looked at him. It was clear both of us did not own that path. And the nice nature-worshiping guy that I am, I decided it was all his. But I know you're not supposed to run or make a sudden motion. So I'm just smiling. I don't know what my smile was doing, but I was trying to smile, look pleasant. And backing up, just a little bit. No sudden motions, till I get all the way back around that curve, walking backwards. And then when I got outside of that bear, I took off running for everything I had. I did not want to have a closer encounter with that bear. And I wouldn't want to have a close encounter with a lion. But sometimes it seems like God wants to put us through moments like that. Are you blessed yet? Glad you came. Well, isn't this wonderful? He hath turned aside my ways and pulled me in pieces. He hath made me desolate. Isn't that a pretty picture? I was out hiking one time and came around a trail, and there was a deer, and I don't know what it had hold of it, probably a bear, but the deer was literally ripped in pieces. A little bit of the deer over here, and a little bit was over there, and some over there, and some over there. It had just been ripped into pieces, blood and guts everywhere. What a sight that was. And Jeremiah said, sometimes the Lord makes me feel like that's me. Y'all blessed yet? He hath bent his bow and set me as a mark for the arrow. He hath caused the arrows of his quiver to enter into my reins. And sometimes it feels like God's using me for target practice. I grew up working every summer at Camp Brian, not terribly far from here. Wonderful Christian camp. Place mightily used to God in my life. Had an archery range there. And I made a big deal out of it. Every year, some counselors would be sent to the American Archery Association training, and they would learn and achieve qualifications, and that would give them the right to put young people through lessons and give them these awards and so forth for the American Archery Association. Archery range was all set up to be a regulation. They checked it. Everything's supposed to be just the way it's supposed to be. And one day, some visitors came to the camp. Archery range was a little bit away from the other buildings and so forth for obvious reasons. And so I'm walking them over there to show them the archery range. And I'm bragging, we have an American Archery Association approved range. We have American Archery Association approved trainers and counselors. And we give the kids all this first class training, and I'm building it up as I'm walking over there. Of course, we're walking towards the range. As you come up on the range, the people stand here, and the targets are that way, and you come up this way. Perfectly safe. But as we're walking up to the range, an arrow comes by right in front of my face into a tree. I've just been bragging about how high quality our program is. It turns out I don't like having arrows come right by my face. And boy, there were some counselors that heard about that later. And I know what happened. I've seen we'd bring these inner city kids in, and they all want to shoot the bow and arrows. None of them have any idea the kind of strength it takes to shoot a bow and arrow. So they're completely foreign to that. So they get the bow, they get the arrow, they pull it back, and they go through this shock of how hard this is. And when they're in shock, their feet move. And they're trying to get this back. And if you're not careful, they'll be like this. Except our American Archery Association trained counselors have been taught that, and they've been taught to watch and to make sure that does not happen. And that particular day, somebody failed 180 degrees at that. I don't like being part of target practice. But sometimes it feels that way, that God just sent you one thing after another that you didn't want, and in your mind you didn't need, and you don't know how it makes anything better. Boy, are you blessed. How about verse 14? I was a derision to all my people, and their song all the day, so that people laughed at me and mocked me. You ever been there? When you just did something so stupid? I was at a church in North Carolina. The pastor had scheduled the meeting 2 years ahead of time, Brother Abbott, just like you do. I had written it down in the calendar, and he'd asked me to preach a specific meeting on a specific set of topics, and I forgot completely. I just wrote down the meeting. We agreed on the topics 2 years ahead of time. He got ready for the meeting, promoting those topics. On Sunday morning, he's going to preach this. Sunday night, he's going to preach this. Monday night, this. Tuesday night, this. Thursday, Friday. Advertised it on the radio. Put flyers out all over town. I forgot completely. None of the sermons I preached had anything to do with how the topics that had been promoted for the conference. I just did a King James conference for Brother Jerry, and I did a Baptist Heritage Conference. It'd be like we scheduled a Baptist Heritage Conference, and I just came in and preached a General Set of Revival meetings. Forgot all about it. He didn't tell me till the meeting was over, but I knew during the first service, something is wrong here. But I didn't know what it was. Now, this is going to come as a shock to you gracious preachers that let me preach for you. He's never booked me again. Even though it's been about 20 years. Every now and then, I'll be preaching in a preacher's meeting where he's present. And I'll look out there and see him. He's polite. But I know what he's thinking when he's listening to me preach. And I know he's thinking, I'm never going to have him again. Now, sometimes we just do stupid things. And people look at us and they shake their head and they say, what in the world is wrong with him? Look, we're all human. It happens to all of us sometime or another. I understand it. But I can't say I'm blessed by it or encouraged by it. And I can't say I'm encouraged when I look at that preacher and I know what he's thinking. Are you blessed yet? How about this? He hath filled me with bitterness. He hath made me drunken with wormwood. He hath also broken my teeth with gravel stones. How's that for a picture? I'm chewing on gravel until my teeth are all broken. I don't know about you folks, but there's something about having a bad tooth that is a nightmare. It's frightening, it's painful, but the only thing in the world worse than having that bad tooth is going to a dentist. And so you put off going to the dentist until the tooth gets worse and worse and worse. And then it's so bad, you have absolutely no option. You've never been there, but I have. Or how about he hath covered me with ashes? That's a great feeling. That's a great picture. Wouldn't you like to be covered with ashes? I don't know about you, but I haven't got to the part where I have hope yet. Thou hast removed my soul, verse 17, far off from peace. I forgot prosperity. It's been so long, I've forgotten what it was like. And I said, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering my affliction, my misery, the wormwood and the gall, my soul hath them still in remembrance and is humbled in me. This I recalled to my mind, therefore have I hope. Okay. It wasn't verse 1 through 20 that causes us to have hope. So since it wasn't in the verses before, it's got to be in the verses after. So let's see. How about verse 21? This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. How about that? How about that to give you hope? That no matter what I have to face, the very things I thought if I ever had to go through that, I couldn't survive it, I couldn't stand it, I couldn't deal with it. When we did have to go through it, his compassions never failed. He loved us, and he knew what we needed, and in our worst moments, he would give it to us. I went through a heartbreaking time in my ministry. I was just broken. I was broken. And I'd made up my mind it was over. I was preaching a revival meeting a number of years ago. And I said, when this revival meeting is over, I'm done. I said, I'm going to do everything I can to do a good job for this church this week. But come Friday night, when I've preached that last sermon, I'm finished. I'm done. I'm never going to preach again. And I went through it in my mind. Sunday morning, I got 6 messages left. Sunday night, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I preached that message, came down from the pulpit, said, I'm done. About that time, service is over. Most people are gone. 2 teenage girls came in. They're from a different town. They said, Brother Stringer, we're so sorry we're late. We wanted to be here for the service. And we can't stay. We've got curfew and we've got to just turn around and go home right away. Said we got lost on the way here. But said God put it on our heart that we had to come here tonight and tell you how much your preaching means to us. And they got in a car and left. I'm standing there in the parking lot saying, did you really send them here tonight to tell me that? Here I am, still preaching all those years later. Again and again, when I needed something from God, that I had no idea where it would come from and how it would be. God has given me what I had to have when I thought that there was too much or this was too big or that. God again and again and again has been there with exactly what I had to have in that moment that I had to have it. I went through a moment when I was pastor in Chicago, and our Christian school was such a financial burden to us. And we didn't have money to do payroll. There was no way to twist it or turn it. There was nothing to do payroll. Our people didn't make much anyway, and couldn't pay them. And I always paid myself last when we had difficult moments. But there we were. There was nothing. I mean, nothing. And I was scheduled to go preach at a banquet in Florida. I'm getting dropped off at the airport. I am so discouraged. I don't know how I can preach a sermon that night. And I fly down there, and I'm so heartsick. I'm literally thinking on the way, I should not have come. When I get there, I should tell these folks, I'm not able to preach tonight. I just can't do it. So there's no way I could be a blessing to anybody or be an encouragement to anybody. It's a fundraising banquet. I said, how in the world can I tell these folks God will bless and God will supply? Went to the restaurant. Man walked in the restaurant that I had not seen in 15 years. And one of my early years being in Florida, church this gentleman was a member of went through financial heartache. Pastor left. They were just devastated financially. They're saying they couldn't even afford pulpit supply, and how they didn't have anybody for Wednesday nights. I said, I'll preach for you Wednesday night. I promised God many years ago when I was 18, there'd never be a price tag on my preaching. I would never mention money. I'd never make an issue out of money. I said, I'll preach for you as long as you want on Wednesday nights. You don't have to give me anything. I started going out Wednesday nights, and every Wednesday night he'd give me a $20 bill out of his wallet to pay for gas. I preached for them 13 months. That had been 15 years previous. And I saw him walk in. I'm just sick in my stomach because I'm going to have to preach tonight and I don't want to. He walked over to me and he said, Brother Stringer, he said, our church heard you're going through some trouble with the school. I said, yes, sir. He said, you stood with us when we didn't have anything. He said, we're doing great now. Our church is prospering and blessed. He said, we want to stand with you. And he'd called the church and found out how much we needed for payroll and handed me a check from their church to cover payroll, 2 weeks payroll. You know, I was in a different frame of mind about preaching that night after that. It was almost, do we have to eat? Can I get to the pulpit? Guess what? His compassions, they fail not. How about having some hope when you remember that? And it goes on. Verse 23. They are new every morning. All those times God has provided for me before. So, well, that was then. This is now. But tomorrow morning, it's new. And he'll provide for me what I need. I don't just mean money. Sometimes money is the easiest way to illustrate it, but many, many times it's other things. But his compassions, they not only don't fail, they will be new tomorrow morning. And what I need tomorrow, I have the promise of God that I will have tomorrow. How's that for hope? Matter of fact, so we look back and we say, man, if I had to ever go through that, I wouldn't be able to make it. Or if I had to go through that, I couldn't do it. If I had to do that, I couldn't survive it. If I had to do that, I couldn't handle it. Turns out we did go through those things. And we got through them. And it turns out all of those difficult experiences actually do give us hope because we got through them and we're still here. And the knowledge that God helped me when I needed it then rides with me now. Because I know tomorrow, same thing. That God is going to be there with what I need when I need it. Because that's the God that he is. And Jeremiah, he's in the terrors of the destruction of Jerusalem. And yet, God's not done with Jeremiah. And God's not done with Jerusalem. I just got back from a couple weeks in the Holy Land. Man, that's an experience. I mean, those were moments. We took a boat ride in the Sea of Galilee. And I remember as a little kid here in Indianapolis, my father had never been in church. I just started going as a bus kid. I'd gotten saved. I would come home and I would try and tell my dad the Sunday school stories that I'd gotten in Sunday school. And I can remember trying to tell him stories about things that happened at the Sea of Galilee. I didn't have the faintest idea what the Sea of Galilee was, neither did he. And we're just sailing along on the Sea of Galilee. I said, this is what I tried to tell him about. I remembered. He is a big fisherman. I hated fishing. I was hyperactive. He would take me fishing with him. I couldn't stand it. I'm still hyperactive. I was a hyperactive child. I said one time preaching that if they'd had Ritalin when I was a child, they'd have put me on it. After the service, my wife said, I'd still like to put you on Ritalin. I was a hyperactive child. Now I'm a hyperactive senior citizen. There's a difference. And I know it disappointed him. I never latched on to fishing. But he got saved right before he died. And we're there on the Sea of Galilee. I thought, sometime in the millennium, I'll be over my hyperactivity. Because I'm going to take Dad fishing on the Sea of Galilee. With my son and my grandson. I mean, that was an experience. That whole time there was an experience. Pastor told me he was going to have me preach on the trip, but he wasn't going to tell me when. Right after we came out of the empty tomb, he introduced me to preach. I said, that's not fair to a person. And it was a hard thing to do because I was so emotional. And yet it was an easy thing to do because I was so emotional. And there was no homiletic excellence to my outline. Well, I've had an awful lot of people mention it to me. We had just gone from the Garden of Gethsemane to Golgotha to the empty tomb. And I had 2-word title on my message, for me. It's all I could think about in the Garden of Gethsemane. For me. We saw Golgotha. It was all I could think about for me. And we saw the tomb empty. And all I could think about was for me. Glory. He rose for me. Glory to God. His mercies, they are new every morning. I wonder what the word every means. A lot of folks don't like words like any and all and every. But glory to God, those are the simplest words in the English language. And his compassions, not only are they great for me, they are new every morning. Yes. And remembering that fills me with hope. And then, the Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore, will I hope in him. Amen. I mean, you understand? When circumstances aren't what we like, and we don't know the answers to things, this we know. The Lord is ours. Yes. 17 years ago, I spent a week in Syria, most amazing week of my life, with faithful Christians serving in the hardest setting imaginable. The one church that invited me, special circumstances had arisen, they were allowed to operate openly. Secretary of State Jim Baker, back during the first Gulf War, had been on an airplane with the pastor of that church. And he told him the story of the church, and they were under great persecution. And Secretary of State Baker went in to see Assad, the dictator. It's Arab custom. They have to give you a gift before you can negotiate anything. And Secretary Baker said, I'm not allowed to accept gifts. United States law. And Assad said, we cannot have a meeting until I have given you a gift. Tell me what you want. Secretary Baker said, there's a church over here in Latakia that your government's been persecuting. Let them have a building and operate openly without persecution. So Assad said, it's done. And the order was issued. They got to come out and operate in the open. Because Secretary Baker, I went over there to preach and was also with 12 underground illegal churches serving the Lord. Had a meeting. One pastor's home, living room. There are probably 20 people total in the living room, and it's kind of jammed. And these pastors are discussing their future. Every single one of them took it for granted they would be killed for their faith. They were debating how to accomplish the most before their time came. And they had some differences on the best method. So they're debating this. Every single one of them took it for granted they would give their life for the service of the Lord. They're talking in Arabic, but it's being translated for me. And after they debated a while, some fine points about how to do it, one of them said, let's ask Dr. Stringer what he thinks. It's interpreted. And I said, Dr. Stringer thinks there's not a preacher in America that should be giving you men advice. We have no idea. And since that time, several of them have been killed. And several of them are missing. I mean, it was not a joke. But they all knew where they stood in the Lord, and they had the Lord real in their life, and that was so obvious. The Lord was their portion. And I saw it in a sense I'd never seen it before. I went home and told my wife, I said, if I ever complain again, just say one phrase to me, Pastor Barudi's living room. And I'll realize I have no right to complain about anything. The Lord is my portion. The Lord is good to them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. I got that for a promise. How about that for giving you hope? Or, it's good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. And we could go on through the rest of this chapter. And the truth is, it is the very heartaches and difficulties we've been through and seeing what God did to sustain us through those that gives us the promise of what he's going to do for us every day. And when I remember that, I have hope. When I look at the clouds of darkness on this country, and they are real, and I don't mean to minimize them in any way, shape, or form. I have been to Vietnam in independent underground churches. I have been to Cambodia and been to the memorial to the Holocaust in Cambodia, where they executed a third of the country's population in 10 years. The number one reason for execution is people were Christians. They had killing fields. They took me to one of the killing fields. It's been so long now. They took there, they would dig a pit. They'd make the people stand in the pit. They'd kill them in the pit. They'd cover them with their bodies up. It's been so long now, the bodies are coming to the surface. We took the tour through the killing field. And the tour guide said, if you see bones or clothing, don't touch them. Somebody comes around every Sunday, and we don't have tours, and picks up the parts of the bodies that have come to the surface. We're walking by, there's an arm bone sticking up. They're the skeletons of children who were killed with their parents. I mean, I saw a little bit of what the darkness was like. They have a museum, 36 rooms of pictures taken as it happened. They say nobody ever gets through all 36 rooms. I did 13. It said, please take me back to my hotel. I can't look at any more of this. I've seen some of the darkness. I've been in Syria and listened to those men who knew that being preachers of the gospel was going to mean their death. I watched as we had a service and some of the militants gathered outside, yelling and screaming, trying to terrify people and keep them from coming. We actually had 2 guards with me everywhere from Assad security police, so the militants weren't going to break into the church. But they're outside screaming. 3 little girls in the neighborhood had gotten saved, coming to church, walking in, holding hands. These men towering over them, screaming at them, trying to frighten them into not coming to church. I started to step outside and they said, please don't, you'll make it worse for them. And I saw those girls every night come through that crowd, come to church. Now, I've seen a bit of the darkness. I don't know it like those people that have lived in it, but I've seen enough of it to know it's real. But Jeremiah, in the middle of the darkest, probably the darkest 3 days so far in Israel's history. It'll be darker yet in the tribulation, but probably the darkest days so far. Jeremiah remembered what God does in the life of his servants, and it filled him with hope. We ought to be filled with hope as the people of God. Pastor.